Green Hydrogen Horizons podcast. I'm Keith Wiggins. This is Liberty Gura. We have really great guests today, and it's a real treat. We're going to be talking with Mike Jelfs. Liberty, give us a little bit about Mike's background here.
Okay. I met Mike on a green hydrogen webinar, and we basically talking about the application of green hydrogen in mobility and also the challenge of producing hydrogen at a cheap price. And then I did see him in the chat interacting quite a lot. And then I could see, no, this guy is quite knowledgeable. And then out of curiosity, I said, okay, can you have a chat? I want to find out why green hydrogen is not being widely produced across Europe. Then we had about 15 minutes WhatsApp call. Then within that 15 minutes, I was like, this guy knows his stuff. And then I'm like, Mike, do you mind coming to our podcast and we chat even further about this topic? And he was like, I'm up for it. So basically, he's an expert in, I would say, in tech, I would say in general. Anything that is to do with green tech, he's your man.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I think you can even read his bio if you want to.
Yes. If you want to read more, you can go to Jelfs, JELFS.org. And he has a blog and lots of interesting articles, very informative. So let's go ahead and bring Mike in and start chatting with him, and let's see what he has to say.
Okay.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Fine, thanks.
Great.
How was yourselves?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Good.
We just wanted to first thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Liberty gave us a little bit of an intro as far as how you guys met, and a little bit about your background. So for me personally, I was very curious. I really liked reading your articles at jelfs.org. So to start off, what was it like growing up in South Leicestershire? Leicestershire?
Leicestershire, yes.
A bit difficult. Yeah, that's
yeah.
That's on me. And how did that influence your intellectual path and that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, rather an interesting background. Yeah, lived here in this area of the country all my life now. Most of you won't know where we are, so we're right in the middle of England, as far away from the sea as you possibly could be, 100 miles in each direction. So yeah, we're not. So my upbringing was more quite traditional. UK, but then I had quite a strange career start. I started work at 17 in a local cattle market in Leicestershire. But I've always been interested in a sort of, I don't know, I've talked about it as being flows of information, flows of data, flows of things. Through various different roles and things, eventually went into retail in about 1992. So probably I'm a little bit older than you two, probably. But anyway, so and that led me to become. I was always back into computers and stuff anyway. So I then went into retail consulting in '97. IBM poached me from the retail I was working with to go and work with them. I worked with them for 10 years, and then I became independent in 2006 when I got quite frustrated by having to back solutions, not so much for IBM, but with the software vendors saying, you must support this, you must support that. And I wanted an independent voice. Luckily, I had enough contacts built up by that time that I could work independently and I could challenge what I saw these big organizations where they were selling a lie, basically.
Yeah.
And that led me into the hydrogen conversation in lots of roundabout ways. I'll just briefly say how that happened. Really, in 2012, I got offered a contract in Shanghai in China. And first time I went out there, got off the plane, and everywhere's wearing face masks. And the air tasted very much like I remembered growing up in near where I lived in the coal mines in the 1970s. We could actually taste the air, it tasted metallic and horrible. And you realise you hadn't really solved the pollution problems. What we've done is exported those pollution problems.
We've moved it.
Yeah, we've moved those problems offshore. So we're breathing nice clean air in the UK. We've stopped mining coal virtually by that time. But you realise you hadn't solved anything. So I went on Twitter before Mr. Musk got his hands on it and started ranting and raving about how this wasn't fair. We need to do something about it. By 2018, I was luckily got the time to devote a bit more time to it. Previously, I bought an electric car of my own in 2016, so I was quite an early adopter of that technology. Even a few years before I went to China, actually, I saw a hydrogen bus in London, in mid 2000s. That was a fuel cell bus that was launched in, I think there's two or three of them actually in London, around Oxford Circus in those times. So that had piqued my interest. But I kept getting these people on Twitter saying, hydrogen's the future, batteries aren't. Here's all the manufacturers working on hydrogen cars, blah, 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 blah. Um, and you get increasingly frustrated and you realise, as much as social media is great, you can only go so far ranting against these people saying, no, this isn't working, that doesn't work. So I basically thought, well, how else can I make a difference? So living where I do in Leicestershire, there's not an awful lot you can do, but we do have, I wasn't one for a Greta Thunberg and standing outside with signs. That's not really me. But I thought, what can I use my talents for? In the UK, we've got a political system that's very much two-party. It was a two-party system, but it's very much changed in the last couple of years. So I'm now a Green Party member and actually stood in the general election last year with no hope of winning, but to actually, from a Green Party point of view, which I work with, to actually have a bit more of a voice and get a bit more exposure. And that's worked quite well in terms of raising my profile a little bit. And also, the way the party works is we actually write policy which our leaders follow, which is not the case for most political parties.
Right.
So I'm actually write transport policy for the Green Party. So
That's
which we're
wonderful.
currently rewriting at the moment. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
a very
So
similar
that's
Green
sorry, it's a
Party
bit of a
here.
rambling trail, but that's how. Yeah. No,
Yeah, it's the
we've
same
just
thing.
massively grown. Yeah,
Yeah,
we've massively grown the UK. We're now, I think, a couple of polls now putting in second place behind the far right party, which are currently leading the UK, which is quite scary um, from my political standpoint. But yes, it's definitely shaken up UK politics in the last year or so. But um, that's a little bit. I mean, I missed a lot of things out, but that's basically how I've ended up where I am now, writing 2 or 3 articles a week and quite a lot on hydrogen. Um, and certainly through LinkedIn now, getting tens of thousands of people reading your stuff, which I think does make a difference. Hopefully,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, well, it's well deserved. I
okay.
really,
So it's a bit of
yeah, no, I really, the articles are excellent, and so I was really happy when Liberty turned me on to it, and so you know, just so like you were saying, green hydrogen, the green hydrogen has been touted by industry, and you were discussing the Global Hydrogen Mobility Alliance. It's been touted as like it's not just a sustainable fuel, but one that's competitive with battery technology, and I think that's a big sticking point for you. And so you had a really cool article going through some of the myth busting article that they had put out. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
yeah, it's quite hard to elaborate. It was a
Yeah,
five
of course.
thousand word post that
Yeah,
was. It
that's right.
took quite a bit of time to write. So expanding on it's a little bit difficult, but uh, yeah, it's quite frustrating. So for me, green hydrogen for mobility has got some real issues. Before we start investing in new markets for hydrogen, we've really got to think about around 99% of hydrogen today isn't green. No, it's made from fossil fuels. No, why is this even being put out there? One of the main reasons for that is the cost of the green hydrogen versus grey hydrogen is a lot more expensive. But making it compete against or replacing existing grey hydrogen is quite a difficult thing to do. I sounded I'm negative. I've been to lots of green hydrogen events. I actually visited these sites. You'll see some of my vlogs in the last few months. I've actually been out there. I don't just talk about it, I actually go and see stuff. And now, what I keep saying is, while there might be possibly be a few specialist cases, very long distance trade, maybe certain rail routes where electrification isn't practical, but those are narrow niches. No, and even batteries there are catching up in lots of places. So that those niches are getting smaller and smaller in mobility.
That's one of the things that I was going
And
to ask is like,
and
did
what
you
I,
feel like there was any use cases, for this kind of, sustainable
yeah,
fuel?
I think in Europe now it's getting very, very hard to see those. No, battery technology has moved on so much now. We're even going back to electric trains, for example, that are those routes which can't be electrified, which I've got. There's some examples locally I could bore you with for hours, but there are some local examples of that where we've got local rail lines here that have been here for 200 years, virtually, that haven't been electrified, and it doesn't make commercial sense to electrify them because you need to raise bridges and all sorts of other very complex infrastructure that needs doing to do that electrification. Whereas battery electric now is allowing to charge each stop, and no, so those niches that were there for hydrogen maybe now no longer really are. Some remote parts of Scotland maybe and long distance routes up there that there may be a challenge, but elsewhere it's very hard to see, because obviously direct electrification is so much better than any other form if you can do it that way.
Interesting. By the way, I love.
And one other
I
thing I'd
saw the
like to,
whole. I saw the whole documentary on the English train system and how it evolved over time. I loved it. I thought it was super interesting. It's not. There's no corollary necessarily here in the United States, I suppose. But I always thought that was incredibly charming, and I was a little jealous about that actually.
yeah, it's very charming, but there's a guy called Dr. Beeching who was around in the 1960s who closed three-quarters of the railway network at that time, which has done irreparable damage to lots of local train routes, which today will be very valuable, but no longer exist. There's some of them have been reopened, but lots of railway lines have been built on and such like. So it's actually, I mean, just in my area of South Leicestershire, there used to be 6 railway stations. There's now 1, for
Wow.
example.
Wow.
So, and we've put one of the lines that was to London went through here. They're now building a brand new line to London, having shut one 40 years ago or 50 years ago. So there's lots of challenges even in that area.
Yeah. Oh well, that's so. But that's really very, very interesting, and I really liked the comparisons that you made between how far batteries have come along. Obviously, utilizing battery technology, that's not free either as far as environmental concerns. And I don't know how much you've delved into that, but that's also something to keep in mind as well, right? Um, anyway, Liberty, did you want to go and ask a question?
Okay. Mike, as you know, cost is one of the biggest issues with green hydrogen. It's far much expensive compared to most like gray hydrogen and other stuff. So in your opinion, right, I would say the opportunity cost is one of those economic truths that is difficult to escape from, right? Can you maybe tell us why, when we talk about pushing hydrogen for mobility, that is less, how can I put it, that is less applicable, less efficient than using it maybe for chemical production or something else?
Yeah. Now this is, I suppose, where we're going to touch into something. Now we keep talking about green hydrogen um, as a definition, and that definition varies depending on where you are in the globe. Okay, the definition is not the same, which I can come on a bit more detail in a minute. But one way I try and explain this is I've sort of come up with a framework of how we talk about stuff, and you'll know from your own thing. If we're talking about electrolysis, which is a lot of people talk about when they talk about green hydrogen, we're going through several um, e- changes of energy, so from work to heat and back to work and so on again. And each one of those changes has a theoretical limit in how efficient it can be. So, at the best case scenario, a hydrogen vehicle, when it gets to the wheels of a fuel cell vehicle, which is the most efficient way of converting hydrogen back to electrical energy or work energy, that efficiency is down to around 30%. Yeah. Whereas a battery electric vehicle, we're talking 80, 85, 90% efficient. So, so, so you've got a 3-to-1 ratio virtually there between the efficiency levels, which you're never going to make up. So, for me, that's the biggest downside of any mobility solution. You're never going to compete with a battery electric solution. Now, as Keith said earlier, you've got the challenge here where people always go saying, what about the materials to make the battery? where I always push back and say, well, 95% of those materials can be recycled back into a new battery. And guess what? That new battery you make from those materials, because of technology advances, my little Leaf I have out the front of my house, or I think it's out there, my wife's taken it out now, but that car there was built in 2016 or 2015. When it finally gets to the end of its life at some point in the future, those materials are probably made to the battery that's far better than the battery that was in that Leaf with far more energy capacity with those same materials. So yes, we do have a challenge to build that recycling industry up to make those. Plants are being built because that opportunity is there, and the market will decide. But we won't need to keep extracting materials the same rate we are at the moment. And if you read any of the materials now, that battery electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine vehicle, within 12 to 15,000 miles, will have gained back any of those additional costs in terms of carbon that you have from making the vehicle in the first place. And if you go to a fuel cell vehicle, if you want to put them in the same mark, you try and recycle a fuel cell, you're trying to recycle a hydrogen cylinder. That hydrogen cylinder is not recyclable because it's made of complex materials in order to make it hold a high pressure hydrogen. And it's got platinum in the fuel cell and all those other things which make the recyclable, the circular economy story on that much less valid than it is for a battery electric vehicle. So in every way, it's very hard to justify from a mobility point of view, except in those really edge cases where it will have a role.
Yeah, and so in your view, it's like, yeah, so a lot of batteries currently going to landfill, but they could just be, maybe stored up until we have
Yeah,
that kind of recycling infrastructure.
lots of mobile phone batteries are going to landfill, but not many car batteries going to landfill. To put it that way, even now they're being repurposed.
Oh, that's good.
Lots of
That's
battery
good. I
storage
think
facilities being built. Yeah,
we have an issue in the United States with that. I think I don't think our car batteries are necessarily being
uh,
recycled yet, but it should be happening.
yeah,
Exactly.
it's a bit in California, but not more generally. But yes, that might be something to do with your current government. I,
Yeah.
not getting
Yeah.
apologies to the US, but yes, you've not exactly got a paving environment for building those industries up at the moment.
No, I think that is absolutely that's a wonderful point. And so with regard to and just a little bit more about with regard to opportunity cost is like you're going to use if you're using hydrogen for mobility, you're not using it for maybe its next best use case, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And in this
yeah. I
case,
mean, yeah, I mean, as you've already said, as I've already said, there's 99% hydrogen made is great and is being used for fertilizers and etc. etc. So, aren't we using this new green hydrogen to replace that grey? That would reduce our emissions straight away. I mean, grey hydrogen itself is probably responsible for 2% of the world's emissions. No, just put it in
yeah,
context.
yeah,
Solving that by replacing it with green surely is the best way forward. Well, these are the cases. That's my view in the matter anyway.
yeah,
Um, but unfortunately, we're still having lots of use cases where that grey is being used for making fertilizer um, and all sorts of food processes and things like that as well. It's quite astonishing to me every time I come across something new.
Uh,
no,
and
that's wonderful.
and and Mike, on the same point, why do you think Toyota keeps on pushing the Toyota Mirage since it's running on hydrogen? If I may
Yeah,
know.
I've seen the new Toyota. They've got a pickup as well now. If you look at one of my latest blogs on over to Nottinghamshire a week or so ago. Oh no, about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. Uh, the guy that's the UK head of Toyota's hydrogen project has actually blocked me on all my social media. So I actually met him. I saw him in person. I saw him in person at this event in Nottingham a couple of weeks ago. Toyota's got a big plant about 25 miles away from where I am, UK plant, and they're giving the mayor of the next city to me a Mirai to travel around in. I mean, I've driven a Mirai, the Mark One, not a Mark Two, uh, way back when. They're nice cars. As all Toyotas, they're well built, well constructed. But there's a legal case going in the US at the moment. I'm part of their Thunderbirds group, whatever it's called, not Thunderbird, whatever Telegram group. Um, have been for a couple of years. I helped them out initially on their legal case. They're sort of suing Toyota and the fuel cell supplier in California
Oh, wow.
for the fact that the system is unreliable. And I've been, again, it's one of those other tangents you get involved in these things. I mean, back in
Yeah.
2008, I think when the California network first launched, and they're still having teething problems now in 2025, sort of tells you something about the robustness of that network. So, yeah,
Right.
it's.
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
But
I don't know why they do. I mean, there's some political, and it's sort of like South Korea and Japan still seem to have a bit of a thing with hydrogen transport. No, but Hyundai as well, also another company, are pushing it quite heavily, and um, yet again, they're still one of leading in battery tech as well. So they must be keeping their options open. Where Toyota have actually fallen behind, in my view, and risk
okay.
quite a challenging future in the next 5, 10 years with the Chinese. I'm sure that Toyota do have a number. I've got one. I can especially see out one window here. A Toyota battery electric vehicle, but there are only one or two models they've got in the UK. Out of 100 odd different models now have electric cars. So, yes, I do worry a little bit for Toyota.
I guess
That's a
that leads us
go
to
ahead.
that
Yeah,
leads
no,
us
I
to
was
the
going to say
second point.
that's right.
Oh,
That's right. So
so
obviously, in we have we had the Nikola company here in the U.S. and the president was a huge advocate for expanding that hydrogen, fueling network. They said it would be incredibly feasible if you're producing at the source, producing hydrogen at the source, and it would reduce the cost of hydrogen fuels to a point where it would be economically feasible to run a hydrogen based fleet. Um, you know, uh, what what do you think are the possibilities of something like that happening, and do we even want that to be happening?
Yes, I remember Nicola well from car rolling down the hill example, wasn't it? That was it.
Right, right.
Yes, I think I spoke to Mr. Milton at one point. I think he on my Twitter days. I think he actually responded to a couple of my questions.
Oh, good.
If you're going to make hydrogen, you make it where you're going to use it. I think is the biggest thing. So if there was an edge case where trucks were going to go into the Arctic Circle or something, and you needed, I don't know, long distance truck that could do that distance, and you got that edge case. Yes, you'd be much better not piping, transported by tanker, whatever else. You're much better making hydrogen where it's going to be used. Transporting it is incredibly difficult and challenging thing to do. Something I've also written about at great length. If you want to read my thing about transporting hydrogen from the Middle East over to the UK, and I'm actually writing something about that this week as well. So to answer your question, if you were going to use it for a transport application, yes, you're much better make it at the place you're going to use it rather than trying to transport in any way, shape, or form. As almost all hydrogen today is being used where it's made, with very few exceptions.
And so, we're talking about like uh, what kind of like power production do you need a nuclear plant in order to make it, economically feasible? As far as like its production and whatnot.
Yeah, no, nuclear takes a hell of a long time to make, and timescales that we're talking about, if we're just talking transition,
Mm.
we've got a nuclear plant called Hinkley Point C here, and one of my many roles before I went into retail was actually working in the nuclear power industry
Really?
and helping build what was called Hinkley Point B, which is the previous asset to Hinkley Point C.
Yeah.
Hinkley Point C was meant to take 10 years to build, and it's currently on, I think, 16 years into its build cycle, and now projected to open in 2030, I think.
Damn, that's a long time.
To make, yes, it takes a hell of a long time to do it safely and to do it effectively. Let's keep talking about small modular reactors now, SMRs. Is Rolls-Royce involved in that process? Again, I think there's one being made so far. Again, when you downscale something to make it smaller, it becomes more maintenance heavy, less efficient, and so on. So I really don't see much of an SMR playing much of a role either. I hope I'm wrong. I mean, it's a low carbon power source. I've
Yeah.
got nothing against nuclear. What really concerns me is the timescales we're talking about getting to net zero, whatever we're talking about, doesn't allow us the time to start now. France has a lot of its power from nuclear. It's already in place. It makes sense to keep it open as long as possible. But again, they have limited lifespan because of things begin to fracture over periods of time. They become much more expensive to keep open. We keep extending the lifespan of some of our nuclear plants in the UK to keep them struggling on for a bit longer. And again, decommissioning, storing the waste, all those things becomes a challenge as well. So, but using nuclear for hydrogen, yes, you could, but it shouldn't be the primary reason for building a new nuclear power plant.
Of course, yeah, probably not. Liberty, go ahead. You had a point you wanted to make.
Okay. So, Mike, there was an article that you wrote about green power, right? Can you elaborate a bit more about how we can redefine the parameters for production of green hydrogen to make it more cheaper and more practical?
I'm trying to remember which one of the articles that was. I think we come back to that. I did mention earlier about green hydrogen. I think the terms of colours of hydrogen was actually made up by the fossil fuel industry about 10, 15 years ago. Definitions don't agree with each other depending on which continent you're sitting in. Even in Europe, the definitions have changed, and I'll keep pushing back on some of these definitions. So, what we term as green hydrogen in the UK, because of what we call Brexit, which means we separated ourselves from Europe, actually differs the definition in Europe. So, in Europe, there's a definition called RED 3, which means to call it green hydrogen, it has to be from electrolysis. It has to be from a new renewable source. Okay. What I wrote an article about, which may be what we're referring to in a couple of weeks ago, was about private wire. So in the UK, we have a different definition. Okay, which means that we can wish to ensure that the source is renewable, and that includes, in this case, biomass. Um, and uh, and the two plants that have sort of come along in the last year, or coming along, and just about launching, the one I went to visit in Nottinghamshire, both use this private wire trick, in my view, where you've got an existing biomass plant that's been around for years. The one in Nottinghamshire has been around for 10, 15 years, using animal waste to produce electricity. It's connected to the grid. So what they've done is connected a new private wire or direct wire to this hydrogen plant, and got a little bit of solar and wind as well, but not an awful lot, and producing hydrogen 24/7. And the same applies in South Wales, where there's a hydrogen truck trial, which is what sparked my interest, where they've where they burn thousands of tons of waste wood a year. That's been around for 20 years, I think, no, maybe 15. And it's very similar. They're just putting in place a direct wire again to produce the hydrogen for this hydrogen truck trial, which will run trucks along the M4 corridor, hydrogen trucks, which has got a number of issues which I could go on great detail about. But in both these instances, those projects in Europe wouldn't be called green hydrogen because they don't meet the criteria. Because all they're doing is diverting existing electricity that could be used on a grid to make hydrogen. So what you're doing, obviously, if we're going to divert that electricity, we're going to have to replace it with something. And the UK, we're in a situation where 50% of the gas we use is home produced. So we have a big plant, wells in the North Sea. They produce 50% of the gas we need for the UK. The other 50% comes from LP, liquid natural gas, which is imported either from the Middle East or from the US.
Right.
And anyone who knows about liquid natural gas will know it's one of the most polluting things in the globe. No, it's actually more polluting in lots of cases than coal is. So what we're doing is diverting some of that electricity away and replacing it effectively with one of the dirtiest fuels around.
Right.
So to my mind, calling this green hydrogen is a bit of a push, to be honest.
It's
Whereas the European definition, yeah. Whereas yes, it is, and I've got quite a few comments on my LinkedIn post about it as well, saying calling this thing out. And I think I did a thing saying this is the story and this is the reality. No, calling those things out is what I'm trying to do a bit more. Because it's easy for, we've got the mayor, again, the mayor was there, she told this brilliant story about them using this lovely green hydrogen, thinking all we're doing is diverting electricity that will be used far more efficiently into something far less efficient. So, yes, it's the definition there it's very frustrating. The RED 3 definition, I think, is one of the best in the globe, in my view, and the low carbon definition in the UK has got some real big holes in it, which is meaning that rather than curtailed renewables, we're using biomass 24/7, which is not a great, in my view, a great way of
So
solving the climate problem.
you're saying like in order to probably maybe direct wire. Say you're going to bring new power production online, um, and the private wire is power production directly to hydrogen production. I'm assuming, right? If I remember correctly. But you're saying like it's why don't we just add additional production, renewable production to the grid, and that can be utilized, like just regular grid production, more efficient, can be utilized for the hydrogen production as long as you're bringing additional production online, something like that, right? Just maybe something a little bit more holistic as opposed to, uh, you know, a, a little bit more obscured, I suppose, sort of thing. Um, yeah, no,
Yeah, I
that's
think
great.
what yeah, I think one of the other issues that comes from that is if we're talking about the curtailments often mentioned, every presentation I ever go to, they mention we curtailed X amount of terawatt hours last year of electricity because we couldn't use it, which is usually a lie because the reason why we couldn't use it is because you couldn't transfer it to where it was needed. It's not as though it was actually really surplus. If we improve our grid infrastructure, that surplus isn't really a surplus. Very few places are in a situation where we actually produce more energy than we are consuming. On a Sunday afternoon in the UK, on a very sunny day or a very windy day, we may just about be there now, but we're not really there. And the big problem with electrolyzers is they're bloody expensive. Yeah, it's not a cheap thing. You can't afford to have it sitting around doing nothing for days or weeks on the off chance that then suddenly is a peak in electricity and we can then use it. So the whole model, capex opex, doesn't make any sense for electrolyzers to sit around on the off chance. And also, you're going to get those electrolyzers by somehow to where that power's coming from. So you're still going to need some sort of connection to it. So again, it's one of those things that sounds great in principle, but when you try and apply it, no, it is better to spend the money on the grid until to your point we really have a true excess of renewables when we
Well,
could
that's
then in theory make use of some technology like that.
yeah. Well, that kind of brings me to maybe the our last point here, which is um, you know uh, the the idea, the theory of utilizing the most abundant element in the universe, to store power, to create power. It's very alluring, but so I suppose what are the I suppose what are the challenges of getting us to utilize this? What would be some of the best use cases for this sustainable fuel, right? And you said maybe utilizing excess power production to produce our hydrogen and store it, something along those lines. In your opinion, where do you think we should be going with this
No.
technology?
Okay. There's a couple of things there. I mean, in a couple of recent debates I've sort of had, but this long-term storage, I went to another event, I think back in spring this year, where we're talking about storing hydrogen in old oil wells on land in the UK. Um, um, because they're naturally obviously quite good at holding stuff underground. Um, it turns out it's quite expensive and very difficult to do, and they're very dirty, and the hydrogen needs cleaning, and all sorts of difficult things like that. But salt cabins and things like that, there are lots of test things to do that to store. Because the one thing that's always cooled down, I won't try and pronounce the word, but it's long-term, gaps in renewable generation. So when the wind isn't blowing, when the sun isn't shining, what do we do? Sort of scenario, scarce tactics. That actually happens very, very rarely that we don't have the wind or sun somewhere nearby. But there may be a use case for long-term storage, and that's where hydrogen may possibly have a role. Again, it's difficult to think about. We probably need it in larger locations because we don't want to be storing in small volumes because to more to make it scale and work efficiently. You probably want it in a larger location. But I'm still yet to be fully convinced that's the use case where what is this? Now, the other end of the scale, there are a couple of niche cases, and that was another thing on this thing a few weeks ago where it was hard to argue against where it might be a good use. And that was like I had Netflix or somebody working in the film industry where they've got remote site locations where they want energy for a number of days, um, but they haven't got a grid connection. They're middle of nowhere. One of the use cases that actually is being used and being tried in the UK is that sort of thing where you've got a effectively being used as a generator with zero emissions effectively at the site to power a film set and all the ancillary facilities nearby. There's quite a high margin because the cost of the fuel isn't such an issue for that industry because that's quite a minor part of all the amount of money these actors get paid and the amount of money these film Netflix things take to make. The fuel cost is a relatively minor issue, but it does mean that there can be zero. With the filming, in various locations, it's relatively easy to move hydrogen around. In that case, it's not a big thing to move. But that moved on to the other thing, which I think I would also like to mention is about construction. So a big company called JCB in the UK, and if you look online, you'll see lots of videos from Mr. Bamford, Lord Bamford, I think he is, who is the owner of JCB, have invested lots of money in producing, I think it's 100 million so far, maybe more than that, in producing hydrogen engine, which to me is the most illogical, nonsensical, totally stupid thing to do. But I'll try to be more politically correct on that. If you think hydrogen fuel cells not that efficient, well, internal combustion engine for hydrogen is probably the least efficient thing you could probably do, because it has all sorts of issues. Not only the fact that if you go to a construction site, they leave their machines running all day, irrespective of anybody's in there, because starting and stopping the tractor or the digger or the loader or the crane means that it's got strain on the engine. You start and stop it, so they tend to leave them ticking over all day. So not only is it a very inefficient use of burning hydrogen, it's also a incredibly with such a where construction sites are running on tight margins quite a lot of the time. It doesn't make any sense to me. Whereas remote filming locations does. So that's another end of the scale. But yeah, seasonal storage it may have a role, but we've yet to see any real large scale implementation of that.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a bit of a blurb on. There's a couple of examples for you.
No, it's that's great, and it's something that Liberty and I, we really harp on, with regard to other technologies that we're interested in, as well as always, it's important to utilize the right tool for the right job. We're looking for efficiency. We're looking for like human flourishing. We're not just looking to do something because it can be done, right? And I think that's what's going to push us forward. Mike, it's been a wonderful conversation. I've actually learned quite a bit myself, kind of maybe changed some of my preconceptions about some of this technology as well. Can you let people know, where they can reach you, where they can read more about your work, just for the audience?
Okay. But the website's very easy to remember, and my contact details are all on there. So it's just my surname, jelfs.org. And if you go onto that website, my contact details are on that page. That's probably the easiest way. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, which is where I do most of my posting. So they're the best place to get hold of me.
Where can they reach you on LinkedIn? Just type in your name.
Yes, yeah. I mean, luckily there's only two of us in the world that are on LinkedIn, and the other guy.
There's only two.
The other guys in. Good. Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. I'm sure Liberty's not that common either.
That's right. Yeah, we're all very unique in that way. Oh, Mike, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can keep talking. You have lots of other things that you're working on right now, and they're all incredibly interesting. So I'd love to chat with you again in the future.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Have
Thanks
a great day.
Mike.
See ya.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Green Horizons as we explored the fascinating world of green hydrogen.